Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Welcome to this first session of lessons on innovation from other sectors. On behalf of all the conveners that have gently accepted to organize this session, Mecorot, Getulio Vargas Foundation, the Institute of Public Utilities from the Michigan State University, and the Inter-American Development Bank, I want to welcome you to our seminar. Today, 770 million people don't have access to electricity, and close to 729 million people don't have access to phones. Yet, 2 billion people do not have access to safe water, and more than 3.5 billion people lack adequate sludge management. What's a stark difference between energy, electricity, phone connection, and water and sanitation? One of the biggest game changers has been the innovation that took place in these sectors. Their organizational structure, their governance, and their management. In this seminar, we pursue three objectives. First, understand the complexities of our sector and learn about other sectors' journey to innovation. Second, find out how countries like Israel, living in a water-scarce environment, are able to provide water, food, and energy security, as well as the different challenges that India, South Africa, and Argentina are facing today. And finally, in a very dynamic session, we will learn about innovations from young entrepreneurs and experts from other sectors, from the goods and services, from transport, and for energy. We will begin with a keynote speech by Janice Becher, who is a professor of political science and an adjunct in economics at Michigan State University and editor of the journal Utilities Policy, Elsevier. Then Rachna Gangwar, a partner at Infrastructure Consulting and Training Services, will discuss innovations in India's rural roads, followed by Joyisa Dutra, the founder and director of the Center for Studies in Regulation and Infrastructure at Foundation Getulio Vargas in Brazil. She will share lessons on innovations from the electricity sector in the energy transition. Then Abraham Ngobeni will discuss the work of innovation Africa in solar water pumps. We will close the session with a panel discussion. Without any further delay, Janice, you have the floor.
All right, very good. All right, can you hear me now? Oops, and I don't have my video, so I will start that as well. Thank you so much. Thank you for the honor and privilege of joining you here in Stockholm and for this seminar series. I've enjoyed the dialogue so much. I think we've learned so much in the process, and I'm looking forward to continuing to working with all of you. And I thank all of you for joining us today. And we look forward to interacting with you over 3 days of this wonderful series. So I had the challenge. I'm still not sure how I got the assignment, but I have the challenge of trying to talk about these issues from a higher comparative level. I'll do my best. I apologize for a couple of things. It's rather US-centric because that's my experience, although with the journal, I get good exposure to wonderful thought leaders from all around the world. But I have too much information, which is typical. And so some of these slides I will rest on for just a matter of seconds, so you cannot blink during my talk. So these were the organizing questions that I used to think about this with our committee and the interaction that we had. They evolved and they'll continue to evolve. All of my work is a work in process, just like innovation is a work in process, right? So I'm thinking about, can public utilities innovate and network industries? And for our purposes, I'll sort of lump those together. And do they innovate? We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about some alternative ideologies and theory around innovation. I'll focus a little bit because it is my sector area. What are the properties of the water sector that distinguish it from other sectors in relation to innovation? What are the factors that shape utility culture and risk aversion generally and for water? How can innovation in the sector be enabled, implemented, and diffused? And that's what we'll talk about over the next few days. And then the role of institutions and regulation, economic regulation in particular, in enabling innovation. And then I'll emphasize at the end how important normative evaluation is to ensuring that innovation is beneficial to those who will most be affected by its implementation. So what are the public utilities that we're talking about? There are more narrow and broader definitions, but we're generally talking about industries that rely on networks. We're talking about energy, electricity, and gas. We're talking about communication systems. We're talking about postal service even as one of the early networked industries. And then, of course, we're talking about water and wastewater. I would say, I think we would all agree that public utilities play a unique role in the political economy and have unique characteristics. I like to say all infrastructure is public infrastructure and that it's designed and implemented for the public interest. And I think we should stay focused on that, regardless of the ownership form or industry or market structure. I also like to say utilities and networks don't just connect things, they connect people. And that's so critical. And they allow us to pool our resources and satisfy our needs. So that's how the concept has evolved. I wanted to just touch briefly. It's not my area of expertise. There are others far more knowledgeable, but we wanted to focus on how infrastructure is part of the building blocks of the Sustainable Development Goals. Having that critical infrastructure allows for better practices and ultimately for better global outcomes. And I think that's why we're all here. There is an urgency to innovate. Sergio just made that point so eloquently. We have climate change, we have disparities of economic and physical scarcity, and we have too many people who go without adequate water and sanitation services in the world, and they suffer as a result. We heard in the opening remarks that these are also very gendered issues. It's often women and children who pay the higher price even of these issues. So I won't go into these details at all, but there are what I would consider sort of ideologies of innovation, mainly centering on the idea that market competition and market forces or market-like mechanisms will stimulate innovation. I'll put some of that in context, but I also wanted to emphasize that there are other motives for innovation besides markets, besides pecuniary rewards, monetary incentives. There are all kinds of reasons people innovate or entities innovate, some which also have to do with the goals of collaboration and altruism, or even just scientific discovery itself. So again, there's sort of this general perception that monopolies are not so good at innovation and competitive enterprises are good at innovation. And you sort of see this comparison, we sort of have these general biases about that sort of favor competitive enterprises in this space. When you look at the literature and the evidence, and I think some of the practical experience, we find it's a little more complicated a story. And in fact, I would assert that market structure itself, rather than ownership or rather than necessarily private sector based competition, is probably more relevant. So in other words, market structures, the scale of enterprises, these are really important. So in fact, competition may not necessarily be a prerequisite for innovation. Innovation can happen in other contexts. And in fact, there's some literature suggesting that oligopoly, concentration, actually aids in innovation. In other words, having scale, systems or entities of scale can make a difference. In other words, that large entities can help lead innovation. So lack of competition is not an excuse to not innovate. So I looked at different kinds of data sources in this area, looking at patent activity, what's happening there. And of course, as we'll hear about the energy sector later, but in energy, we do see a lot of patent activity, and more so, though, in this case, on the commercial side than necessarily on the network industry side. But we're certainly seeing the impact of the energy transition there. So can the public sector innovate? Of course they can. And in fact, if you look at the oh, this is very very interesting. Some of my words came up in alternative languages and so on from my understanding. But I created this word cloud of these different discoveries, inventions, and so on that came about through government support. So the government plays a very important role in innovation. So it's not public versus private, it's more about the complexity of their interactions. And the government supports innovation in all kinds of ways, through physical infrastructure itself, education systems, research and development, and so on. So the public sector certainly has to innovate, as well, and can innovate based on experience. And that includes state-owned enterprises. So I looked at the literature a little bit and found some fairly persuasive evidence that state-owned enterprises can innovate. And in many ways, their innovation is slightly different than the innovation in the private sector. And they will tend to focus more on technologies and approaches that have a bit more of a public orientation, or sometimes orientation to emerging values around clean energy or other goals. In other words, they have understandably a less commercial orientation. Can monopolies innovate? One of the interesting examples we have there is Bell Labs. We don't have a communications focus on today's panel. We may hear more about it on Wednesday. But Bell Labs, of course, the Bell telephone system was a gigantic monopoly in the United States. It dominated for many, many years till it was challenged, until it was disrupted. But in the course of their existence, they created the Bell Journal of Economics, and they secured all kinds of patents. So it sort of goes to this idea that a large monopoly can certainly use that market position to advance innovation. Now, some people would say, of course, that that's to their benefit, right? That they did that to secure their monopoly. So it's a little bit of a cynical view, but nonetheless, they can and they did innovate, and a lot of interesting things happened along those lines. Is environmental regulation contrary or positive to innovation? And in fact, there's the Michael Porter hypothesis. He sort of advanced this idea that regulation itself can actually motivate and promote innovation in very positive ways. And so, that's something we tend to think of regulation as being anti-innovation, when in fact it can be quite positive. Here, in other lectures, we go on and on about characteristics of monopolies, all the things that make them distinctive relative to other kinds of businesses, especially issues like scale economies and entry barriers and infrastructure intensity. The water sector, how does it compare? Well, it is, I threw this out at one of our early meetings and we all pondered it. Water is the only utility product that we physically ingest. And that does make it distinctive among the other products. You're not supposed to interact with them in that way, at least. But it's also the most capital intensive. In other words, it requires much more investment relative to revenue streams that might come from that investment. It's heavy, it's incompressible. I'm going to come back to some of the other characteristics. It's very monopolistic and fragmented. I think that's one of the key differences between the sectors is the sort of bifurcation of large and small systems, and the large number of small systems that we have in many parts of the world. There are offsetting economies in water. There's no substitutes for water, and so on. And then again, we have on the institutional and structural side, we've got this diversity, and we also have the stringent environmental regulations. Now, there's some things that are on that characteristic list that are innovation positive. Water is a difficult thing, as we know. We see it in the news now. There's always seems to be too much or too little, right? And Mother Nature decides. And so we experience that, and we're experiencing that more with climate change. But water has these wonderful properties that I always say energy wishes it had, right? Energy it seeks to be more storable, renewable, and more abundant. So we're that's a key difference. On the negative side, though, is the precaution that we take because we physically ingest the product. So we follow sort of a precautionary principle of regulation. So let's switch to, and that causes us to be more conservative. One thing I want to touch on is that, there are different modes of innovation. And I would suggest that while we think of innovation often as being a big thing, a disruptive thing, more often it's probably more incremental, more reactive, and more focused on technology than the bigger structural and technological changes, or big organization or big industry-wide changes. And that's okay. Small innovations can really matter. Innovation involves risk-taking. And in fact, there's sort of an ironic situation that you have to take risks to manage risks. And those, by doing so, you can actually lower enterprise risk. And that's been explored in the literature as well. In terms of why are water utilities, again, particularly risk averse, we have endogenous factors, again, around organizational culture. We have exogenous in terms of regulation. So we generally see water utility managers being particularly risk averse, very sort of engineering focused. Now, if you take a look at utilities through the long lens of history, of course we've innovated. We used to do things quite differently. So while we still do, we still have wires and we still have pipes, we also see a lot of innovation. And we're starting to see this, we see the adoption of technologies. We also see the utility workforce changing. We've even seen in some cases network type industries suffer from what we call the death spiral, where they have been subject to the to that cycle of creative destruction. So Joisa will talk about energy transition, but I put in some slides sort of indicating how we're seeing that, and again, that's an issue that's been on our agenda a long time. And we have seen gradual, an evolution there. We've certainly seen in water, an evolution in water treatment. We've seen evolution on the supply side in terms of especially areas like reuse and desalination. We're going to hear about some of that. One of the biggest innovations we've seen in water we don't celebrate enough is the demand side and efficiency gains, which have been really phenomenal and have saved lots and lots of energy and lots of water. We've also seen an explosion of technology, and we're going to hear more about it, through this whole, through our sessions and through Water Week. So it's not entirely clear that water entirely lags. I also like to note that keep in mind that not all innovation is high tech. So we're talking a lot about technology. This is one of my favorite examples. Those a leak detection dog, and so if that technology works, then get yourself a nice dog, and that'll be part of he or she will be part of your team. These are what I consider some of the game changers in water. I think we are starting to see those make a difference, but again, they have to be subject to examination. I certainly think the water energy nexus is a huge area to explore. So as I got to wrap up pretty soon, so there are, these also, there are these, there's a wide variety of structural and institutional domains we could talk about, and we're seeing innovation there as well. Maybe not at the pace we would, we would prefer, but we are seeing I think we're seeing things happen. The industry, I'll touch briefly on funding and financing. I think one of our issues is that we moved toward a enterprise model. And we've sort of locked ourselves into thinking about water systems as, revenue generating entities. We've locked ourselves into the concept of full cost pricing. And I think an innovation area to explore is to open our minds to hybrid and more creative models for funding infrastructure and making it available. So my last couple of slides here, economic regulation. That plays a critical role. All firms are sort of value-oriented and regulated firms as well. There are things that regulators can do to promote innovation, switch to more of an outcome orientation and to try to, again, advance incentives and allow for flexibility. So we are seeing even our long standing regulatory methods in the US and the UK are now evolving, I think, to recognize more of a performance-based orientation, including things like comparative competition. So innovation is a process, and it's a complicated process. That's partly why it doesn't happen so quickly. And some of that is just necessary, I think, to be protective again. The diffusion of innovation also depends on whether a technology or an approach or an institution gains acceptance, and then that there are system level capacities for implementation. I want to end on what I think is important too, and that is to have a normative evaluation framework. Is innovation, is it beneficial? Is it in the public interest, prudent, consistent with our principles and values, responsive based on engagement, accessible and affordable, and ultimately is it equitable, fair, and just? So to conclude, I would say innovation should not be conflated with ideology. And I think, we need to be innovative in the way we think about innovation. So with that, I will end, and I will pass it on to Rajna.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Rajna,
Go ahead,
please
please.
go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you very much for having me here. And it's really a privilege to be connecting with the audience and the panelists. Janice has very comprehensively touched on various aspects of innovations across industries. So let me take you through the one of the projects in India on rural roads a little more deeply, and talk about the innovations from the perspective of a developing economy like India. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So just the 4 categories of innovations broadly can be looked at in the transportation and even in the other sectors. These are not mutually exclusive, and the developments or the progress in one affects the other. So these are basically the technological innovations, the policy and regulatory innovations, services and business model, and environmental sustainability. So as we have heard, there are a lot of disruptive technologies that are taking place, and that is the case also in transportation. And there are some innovations are happening in the technological space, and then there are related to policy and regulatory, and especially for countries like us in India, where this is a very, very important area, because we have to take so many social infrastructure projects, and the governance and the regulatory principles and the way the government takes up these projects is very, very important. And then we have the third category, where the services and business model innovations, where the companies and the organizations, they continue to challenge, they continue to push boundaries of innovations, in the business models, talking about the revenues, expanding beyond the traditional revenue streams and investment approaches. And the fourth category is the environmental sustainability, where because the transport is 20% is the carbon emissions are from the transport sector. So there are a lot of initiatives and the innovations being taken place in the construction, the materials that are used, or in the fuel to make to have the greener practices. So these are the 4 categories. And now let me come to the project directly. So the Rural Road Development Program of India, this is the world's largest rural development program till date ever taken anywhere. So, and let me talk about some of the innovations in this context. So this program was launched in year 2000, that is more than 2 decades ago. And the aim was to connect the remote habitations and the tribal areas with adequate road infrastructure. Despite having the 2nd largest road network globally, rural road quality was not adequate And at the point of time this program was launched, almost 30% of the population, that was 300 million people, were without the access of proper roads. So till date, in past 2 decades, over 2 decades, almost or more than 740,000 kilometers of rural roads have been constructed. That translates to more than 90 kilometers per day construction of these roads under these programs, and linking more than 170,000 habitations which were not connected earlier. So executing a program of this magnitude was a very challenging task. Can we go to the next slide? Because India comprises of 28 states, and this program was across the country, and the challenges that were faced were mainly the standardization, how to ensure that all the road projects undertaken in this program have this the standard technical and the management specifications, how to ensure the transparency and ensure that there are no, how do we minimize the time and cost overruns, how to control the quality and have the transparency. So these were some of the challenges which look easy, but for a program of this scale were not easy to manage, and and how to basically implement this project. And so shall we just go to the next slide, please? So in this, through various deliberations and all, the standard procedures were established, and these were for all stages of the projects, where all the states that were implementing taking roads from under this program had to adhere to. All these documents were put in public domain. So main innovations which are going beyond, or that we can call innovations, of course it's again a process, as Janice has said, but what comes out from this program is that the 3 areas where we could say at least that we have tried doing something different than how the road projects were earlier undertaken in the country, and probably other parts of the world also, especially in the developing economies. So one was the community participation was ensured right from the very beginning of the project, right from the conceptualization when the alignment of the project was decided. And the second was, even for the program, Rural Road Development Program, in the process, the environmental norms were established as to what material is to be used for construction, and to the extent the green material and the green technology were promoted. And the third and the very important was the e-governance. So to maintain the transparency and so a substantial effort was put in to have everything centralized and or digitally and in the public domain and open to public scrutiny. So every document, tender document, all the status of the payments, all the how much road has been already how many projects have already been given, in which state, what are the details of the project, and what are the terms and conditions. Everything was in the public domain. And for the maintenance also, there was a mobile applications have been developed where even the citizens would give their feedback, and these mobile applications were geotagged. So let me quickly summarize, because I think I'm just running out of time. So at the end, I would just say that this project has in a way a social infrastructure project in the rural areas has changed the socio-economic indicators. Just because these roads now exist, people have better access to healthcare, employment, and the rural markets. And it has contributed to the social development goals, which is ultimately the objective of the transport projects. And Yeah. So, and in the whole process, also the capability, capacity building was also one of the important element of this project, so that all the projects were awarded or were tried to be awarded to the contractors, the local contractors, and also the welfare schemes of the government were now easily accessible because now there is a road available. So let me quickly summarize that these kind of projects which may not have the financial return but they do have far-reaching greater advantages, and the governments like India or the developing countries, they should devise indigenous approaches to execute some such programs that foster social sustainability. And the innovations towards the green infrastructure and the green transport will intensify, because there is a stark reality of accelerating the global warming threats, and the landscape of the sector is changing with the disruptive technology and the business models, and the innovations in the policy and regulatory space in the times to come will become more important. So thank you very much for having me here, and thank you. I hope I'm on time.
So my turn. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Pleasure to take part in this discussion. In the book Power and Progress, Acemoglu and Simon Johnson write about why technology has all too often benefited elites and how we must reshape the path of the innovation to create shared prosperity. New ways of organizing production can either serve the narrow interests of an elite or become the foundation for widespread prosperity. This is a challenge posed to the electricity sector now. I will focus on innovations in the electricity sector, innovations on supply, on demand, and policy innovations that are beneficial to society and sustained over time. But first, setting the scene. Next slide. Under the Paris Agreement, 177 parties representing countries have submitted or updated NDCs to tackle climate change. Achieving this common goal requires an energy transition of exceptional scope, depth, and speed. We must significantly change the way we produce and consume energy. The ongoing energy transition that is transforming a more than 100-year-old industry can be defined by some pillars. Firstly, decentralization. The transition involves shifting away from the conventional centralized architecture of large-scale power plants, channeling electricity through extensive networks. Instead, we embrace a more decentralized model, characterized by the integration of distributed energy resources, including solar, wind, storage, and energy efficiency solutions. Second pillar, digitization. The integration of advanced digital technologies into electricity grids and meters empowers consumers to engage actively within the energy ecosystem. This empowerment enables effective management of energy usage and facilitates their role as producers, or, in the second jargon, prosumers. Lastly, justice. The energy transition brings the consumer to the center of this transformation. The process must deliver equity and fairness, flipping the conventional wisdom around. Innovation plays a catalytic role in the energy transition. We are going to approach the concept from three perspectives. Firstly, supply-side innovation. New technologies have become increasingly competitive. The graph illustrates the significant price reductions exhibited by the downward price trends on clean energy equipment from 2014 to 2020. For instance, the cost of equipment and installation has dropped more than 80% in the last decade. Currently, rooftop PV systems for households can be installed for approximately $1 per watt, which is a very competitive price. Even though the pace of price reductions has slowed in recent years due to significant crises since the pandemic and its recovery and the war in Ukraine, this slowdown is expected to be temporary. Demand-side innovation. A revolution is taking place on the consumer interface and behind the meter. Price decreases have allowed the dissemination of solar panels. The higher acceptance of these technologies is not limited to developed economies. Several countries have experienced a high penetration of rooftop solar, the fastest growing technology. From the technical standpoint, anybody with a house and a roof can put solar panels on their top. The IEA projects that the number of households relying on solar PV will grow from 25 million today to more than 100 million by 2030 in its net zero scenario. For instance, Australia envisions that by 2030, half of its households could transform into net electricity producers. This technology has also mainstreamed access to clean energy in several countries. In Africa, even though this high penetration challenges the traditional way electricity systems have been operated, pairing solar and storage brings enhanced flexibility, and it's expected to grow significantly in the years to come. The shift towards a decentralized architecture requires an innovative thinking of policies and regulations. Net energy metering, or NEM policies, have led to increased rooftop solar deployment, but at the cost of fairness. The adopters benefit from charges based on their net electricity consumption. The challenge: utility revenues should cover energy, network costs, and non-marginal costs that include energy efficiency initiatives, research and development, and social protection programs. Under volumetric rates, NEM consumers' contribution to cover these costs are reallocated to non-NEM consumers through adjustment in electricity rates. Hence, volumetric cost recovery is quite regressive. The evidence shows that non-adopting consumers have borne an increasingly and maybe disproportionate share of the grid costs. And this undermines affordability, a major SDG 7 component. Fortunately, policy responses are available. Severin Borenstein and co-authors at UC Berkeley have conducted extensive research on the topic. According to their findings, changing the way costs are recovered can help ensure affordability. They argue that paying for most non-marginal costs through income-based fixed charges can improve equity, shifting the cost burden away from households who can least afford to pay. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to everyone. I will just want to quickly continue from where the previous speaker had just indicated. Of course, my experience in terms of on the energy sector and also on the water sector, it's mainly in the African rural villages, and precisely at Innovation Africa. So it will be just based on the experience here. As indicated, in the rural areas of Africa, we, in terms of penetration with regard to energy and also with regard to the provision of clean drinking water, it is still a major challenge. And for that reason, I will be talking on the solar water pumps and as one of the example which we have been using to be able to penetrate the rural villages, but most importantly, using solar technology as one of the technologies that was able to assist us to get water to the villages, but secondly, to also address the issue of climate change, as we know that we have those challenges. Move to the next slide. So in terms of the organization which I work for, of course, in our experience, it's mainly in the rural areas, where in the villages, of course, in Africa, one of the biggest challenges that we have is lack of energy. And for us to be able to provide solutions in those villages, we had to tap into two sectors. The first sector is the energy sector, and the second one is the water sector. And in the use of solar energy, we were able to penetrate at minimal about 900 villages across 10 African countries, and of course impacting about 4 million people in those African villages. And why did we choose to use solar energy? And we had to use solar energy because one, it is renewable, as indicated by the previous speakers, but we had to package it such that it is because in the rural areas, penetration in terms of provision of energy is still lacking. So we had to bring a solution that is, of course, decentralized, as the previous speaker has indicated, but it needed to be human centered. It needed to its approach. It needed to focus on uplifting the people who are found within those villages. And maybe if we can move to the next slide. We can just shift a little bit also to the next slide. I just want to. So as you can clearly see in the slides which are here, most of the villages that we are operating on, it's as you enter any village, the first thing that you see is that, as indicated, they do not have energy, but we were able to later find out that also in those villages, they do not have clean drinking water. So our approach was we needed to find a solution that will address the energy need, but also secondly, to address the need to have clean drinking water. And the technology which we were able to adopt was that we had to use solar energy to be able to pump clean drinking water found within those villages underground, and of course distribute that water to the villages. And for us to be successful in the villages or in the rural areas, we needed to ensure that we have community participation, because the backbone of any program which you bring to the rural areas, you need to have the villagers involved in its packaging, involved in its implementation, but most importantly, involved in its sustainability. And what we found when we installed these solar water pumps is that if you involve the villagers themselves, or you involve the rural areas, what the program itself or the project itself which you are bringing, it becomes more sustainable. And how we do it, how we have been doing it, is that we were providing training to the locals through their leaders. So when we enter a village, they would form a committee, and with that committee, we would then provide training to them so that they are able to have the know-how of how the entire infrastructure operates. But then one other thing which we had to do is that as we come with our skilled labor into these villages, we needed to bring a technology that will assist us to monitor all the projects across the rural areas. So we developed our own in-house remote monitoring system, which assists us across all the 900 projects which we have done across across Africa. So that technology assists us to be able to know the amount of water which we are able to pump from those projects. But secondly, it assists us to also it gives us live information or live data on a day-to-day basis in terms of how much energy we are generating from those projects. But secondly, how much water we are able to generate and how much water the villagers are able to use. And with this, we have found out that it is very effective because we are able to respond timelessly into those projects. But secondly, the villagers themselves are able to fix anything that gets broken within the project. And this indeed all thanks to the live monitoring unit which we have installed. We can move to the next slide. Thank you so much. So just to summarize very quickly, in terms of our program, firstly, as indicated, we use clean energy. We use solar panels to be able to generate energy, and we are able to pump water using that. The reason for that is because in most of the rural areas, they still use firewood to be able to boil their water. So we had to have a bit of a shift away from fossil fuels and use clean energy. What we found with regard to our project is that whenever we give clean drinking water to the villagers, there's a lot of economic development, because women in this regard, as you can see on the picture there, that women who are the ones who are really affected by lack of water, they start to of course build small businesses. They start to do backyard gardens. They start to do bricklaying or brick making small businesses. So basically, by providing water using solar energy, we are bringing economic independence to the women and children. And of course, one last thing is, as you can see on item number 6, we are using our innovative technology, which is our remote monitoring system, which assists us across all our villages. Even if we are not there on a daily basis, that monitoring unit gives us live information. And if anything is broken, we are able to receive an alert and respond very quickly. The good thing is that the villagers are well trained to fix whatever that is broken, and we are just there to provide them support in this regard. If we can move to the next slide. So of course, if you would like to get in touch with us as Innovation Africa, the information is provided. In a nutshell, we use solar energy to provide clean drinking water to villagers in a sustainable way, with the community being fully involved. And of course, we are able to penetrate very easily into the villages because it is decentralized. And most importantly, we are able to monitor everything, including those who are providing the financial backup. They're able to see everything together with us as we provide the solutions to the villages in Africa. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, everybody. I think you can see that we've got some tremendous insight on this panel, not just in terms of you know, their stories, but also in just how we think about innovation to me. And you know, we originally, started with this theme of lessons from other sectors, but I think we've also evolved to think about the synergies of the sectors. And I see that as a common thread here, that it really is consistent with our goal to break down silos, think of integrative solutions, think of opportunities that present themselves. And I think everybody really captured that well. Joyce, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the energy transition is really directly affecting the water sector?
Hi, Jen. Great opportunity. Thanks for the question. So today we were attending the opening session, and Csaba Carusi, President of the UN Assembly, was emphasizing the need for us to revisit the economics of water paradigm that has been in place for the last 3 decades or so. And I think to a certain extent, this connects with the discussion that we were having here on the need to adapt regulation also in the water sector, to move or to adapt to this world in which we need strive to save resources. We need to align incentives. This is a goal and a change in the world that we live, and a vast political economy challenge to implement. In fact, I would like to hear your impression on that.
I would echo what you've said. I think that we, a lot of people are not aware actually that the energy or the water efficiency gains in the US, those standards were adopted under the Energy Policy Act, not actually a water policy act. And in some ways, it caught the water industry by surprise. These efficiency standards that we put into place. So I think thinking about resources jointly is really helpful. I also thinking about stakeholders jointly, thinking about the workforce, thinking about and the opportunities Abraham mentioned, thinking about customers though in particular. If people are struggling with one service, paying for one service, they're probably struggling with all their services. So we need to think about people holistically as well and how we can help them. But I appreciate that. Thank you. Rachna, you said something that I like to think about, which is capacity development. I was so glad that you used that phrasing and that framing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you see as most promising in that area? It's always been a challenge. But what's the innovation and capacity development?
Yeah, Janice, actually these projects in rural Indias are to the remotest places. Those areas where earlier the roads were of very, very poor quality. So in fact, once these roads have to be constructed, so from where do you get people to do that? So the idea was to develop the local capacity. So now it has been done by setting up labs in the nearby areas, so that the testing is done there, so that the people are given the opportunities to be part of those labs and they are being trained. So these things are being done locally and people are being trained on how to monitor the quality, how to test the material, how to construct the even the construction of the roads and all. So this has been done, and these labs are being set up with the help of some educational institutions and some other the research centers. So that's how this is helping a lot in developing the local capacity in the area.
I like that example a lot. And Abraham, kind of related, you talked about synergies of water and energy as well. And so we know a little bit about the technology opportunities with solar, which is so exciting. And decentralized. How about the organizational synergies? Did you find that entities are willing and able to come together, bring their expertise together?
Could you repeat the question again, Jen?
I was wondering about are there any innovations that focus on bringing the organizations together? If you've got energy providers, water providers, how do they bring themselves together to work on these problems?
Sure,
I mean, you're a facilitator, you're an innovator yourself. I guess you're the catalyst.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you so much. So I will touch in terms of what we've been doing in Africa. So for us to be able to bring in other organizations that, for example, work in the energy space, in the water space, and also in the agricultural space, because that's another sector which we are also working at. We work with the government entities, because all civil society, for example, in the African villages where we work, have to report to government entities. For example, we have to report to the Department of Water and Sanitation. So all NGOs or entities who are in the water space, we all have to have a forum where we discuss our technologies which we are using. Those that are in the agricultural space also have to discuss that. And at the local government space, I'm responsible to ensure that all sister organizations who are either on the energy or in the agriculture and also in the water space come together, and we form forums so that we can share our resources and we can share our expertise. So yes, it is doable, and we have been doing it across Africa, and we have seen a lot of improvement. Of course, I will use another example. In South Africa, where I'm based, we have a sister organization called Africa Foundation. They have been drilling boreholes using, I think they were using plain pumps some time back. And because we entered the space, we showed them the technology of using solar energy. They were able to deal with challenges such as, because they were having high maintenance costs, and they were having little amount of water being pumped to the villagers because you had to play on the pump itself before it can produce water. So we were able to share those experiences, and they have improved. So yes, it is happening on the ground. Yes.
Well, again, I think your good work illustrates the role of the non-governmental, non-utility sectors and facilitating. And I love that concept of creating a space for innovation. That was a phrase that occurred to me too. I had a question for myself, I guess, about or somebody posed, I think Sergio, what can the public sector do? And it's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because the answer is not just to deregulate or just to or even too much flexibility, as the literature would suggest, might actually be counterproductive in a way. So I think we have to get that balance of standards and performance expectations and systems of accountability with the incentives and with the opportunities to innovate. So I think it really is important to just keep revisiting our core values and our, and our priorities to make sure, that we're on track, but allow for some of that flexibility, piloting programs, facilitating exchange, bringing people together. I think regulators, going back to this nexus issue, the regulator of either sector should probably challenge the utilities that they regulate. What are you doing to collaborate and coordinate? As we know, water uses a lot of energy. Energy uses a lot of water. Storing water stores energy. So, as Joisa said, that's part of the energy transition. Let's see. If there's any other questions, you can put them in the chat, or maybe somebody can. If there's questions that are in the other chat, I don't know if we've got two simultaneous going on here, but we're good. I guess we're good. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat, but I hope your wheels are spinning for, for the next couple of sessions, and that you'll continue out and ask those good questions. Do any of our panelists have any comments or questions for each other as we wrap up in the next few minutes? Joisa, I'll loop back to you again. You raised the issue of affordability and pricing reform, which is near and dear to me as well. And the idea that if we're going to pay for critical infrastructure, I think we have to open our minds to thinking about new approaches, new methods that will promote equity and accessibility. That we cannot be confined to maybe our conventions around economics. And I think you point out correctly, the folks at Berkeley and others thinking about some infrastructure charges that are not as based as much on the commodity, but more on using other metrics to make them affordable. Do you want to comment just briefly on that as we close?
Yes, I do. Very important. This is a topic that is very dear to us as well, and the advances on the way forward for all the infrastructures that we need to expand. But for us to think about new metrics, it's important for us to have access to reliable data. Yes, and to define proper metrics. And this is a challenge that has been discussed. It's sort of general, it applies to different geographies, but it's even more critical in low and middle income countries. And I think this is what we have to think about. How can we really disseminate knowledge and access to good quality data that will allow us, like the people from UC Berkeley, to understand how far are we from affordability in pricing network industries and the services that they provide.
Thank you so much. I hope it's something that we can continue to work on together. You have the Slido question, the poll. What was what's your takeaway? What was an exciting or unexpected idea that that you learned today that you want to mention? Somebody's typing, so that's always a good sign. Good, we're getting a couple of answers. I know for me, it was this whole idea about how much innovation is really synergistic. It just really brings home that idea that we don't innovate in silos. That is not proven to be effective. And in fact, you know, innovation almost by definition can't be. Here's the one point, the access gap between water, energy, and telecom. Absolutely. I always find it striking in the US, we have a universal service policy on telecom, but not on water. The thought that public utilities have already innovated some, we always say how much it hasn't. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, I think we do need to give ourselves a little bit of credit, don't we? You can see it in the hallways here at World Water Week. We are not lagging for ideas. Maybe we're lacking for resources or political will at times, but I think there are wonderful ideas and resources. Please do fill out the survey. Please do join us for the next 2 sessions where we will carry these threads forward. We'll hear more case examples and we'll hear more about both the water sector as well as other sectors. And again, we'll be very interactive, especially in that third session on Wednesday. And we look forward to seeing you all again there, if only virtually, but in person perhaps as well if you're around. So thank you so much. We're honored for your attention, and we look forward again to seeing you again. Thank you so much.